renting a public facility, minding my own business. Some people say, well, don't go to preach in my area. Why don't you have your own church? Why don't you do it in your private space? Well, I did. I rented a facility. We were having our own church services, and now I'm evicted. So what's next? I'm not allowed to have private church services, or I'm going to be arrested. And I think that's the message that they're sending.
Well, folks, you may remember the name David Lynn. He's the Toronto street preacher who was actually arrested last summer. Apparently, it's now a crime to preach the gospel anywhere near Toronto's gay village. But there's been a new development to the Lynn story, namely, David Lynn is being deplatformed. No, not by the likes of YouTube or Twitter on social media. Rather, we're talking old school deplatforming. You see, the City of Toronto is no longer allowing Reverend Lynn to rent its facilities based on the city's hate activity policy. Well, joining me now to fill us in today on what is going on is indeed the Reverend Lynn himself. How are you doing, sir?
I'm okay. I mean, our church is in a kind of a fickle right now. I mean, we don't have a permanent location. We had to meet outside because of what's going on. But other than that, continuing to, hold my services to the best that I can.
Now, David, the city says the basis for you not being able to rent any of its facilities anymore is based on something called the hate activities policy. I haven't had a chance to read through the hate activities policy, but it comes down to this. And when I last spoke with you, you told me that when you were in the gay village preaching the gospel, at least what you said to me was that there was nothing hateful. You weren't directing any kind of derogatory remarks towards anyone. No. So what is going on here? Is it just that, I guess, preaching the gospel is interpreted as hateful these days?
100%. It's blatant discrimination. I mean, my preaching on June 4th this year in the gay village, it was all live streamed. And there was not one single word that was hateful or targeted. And in fact, it was a part of a Toronto tour where I was going to many different communities. And that's why they couldn't charge me with hate speech, because there was no hate speech. And, after we had a rally, a simple civil rights rally where we were more introspective, we made it very clear we love all communities, including the LGBT community, and this is not targeted to anybody. But we just want to be respected like anyone else. Civil rights are for Christians too, and nothing hateful was said again. And, it seems as though by being a Christian that now that makes me violating a hate policy. But we've been there for over a year, and we've had many members of the LGBT community come and visit us and ask me to pray for them, and they've never felt 1 ounce of hate at all.
Now, David, that's very interesting what you say. If you weren't indeed convicted of any hate speech crime, then how does the City of Toronto use, this whole idea of a hate provision to deplatform you in terms of renting any of its facilities? How was this explained or conveyed to you?
Well, I'm trying to figure that out as I go. I mean, I reviewed the hate policy myself. I didn't violate the hate policy. There was no recent activity that I was involved in. It seems to be political because there's one particular counselor that has a hatred towards Christianity, Kristen Wong Tam, and she seems to be behind not only the attempted banning of another group in 2015 from the Dundas Square, but behind the motion that she's trying to push in the City of Toronto to make it stricter for any Christian group to rent, and even my dismissal from renting any Toronto facility. So it seems to be a personal vendetta, and I believe that's a conflict of interest for any Toronto city official. I mean, I live within her jurisdiction, and I've tried to reach out to her, to call her or to have a conversation, and she has not returned any of my calls. I've even sent out an email to the Toronto mayor, and they're refusing to even talk to me. So I don't know what's going on. As a constituent of their area and as someone who is protected under the charter as a member of a creed, a legitimate creed within Canada, I should have all rights to rent a public facility.
You
So
know,
it boggles me.
it's very interesting too, David, because Kristen Wontam, a very far left leaning politician, she is lesbian, and I know members of the gay community for decades have said, all we want is some understanding, we want tolerance, we want acceptance. Yet when here you are preaching the gospel, which I think presumably she finds offensive, there is no understanding, there is no tolerance. A bit of a hypocritical position to be in, isn't it?
Very much. I mean, it's one thing to say, you know what, let's all let's all walk these public streets, and you have your opinions, I have mine, and let's be equal. But it's another thing to say, you know what, I have my opinions, and you have to have my opinions, or you're going to go to jail, or you can't rent from my facility, or you can't sit in the front of the bus, or you can't, be a member of any business organization. And that's what's happening. It's basically a strong exclusion of anyone with biblical values from the mainstream, and that's what's happening to me right in front of your face. And it's sad because a lot of the other media outlets, not you, but a lot of the other media are just painting me as some bad guy, and they're not even looking at the live stream. They're not even interviewing me to see my side of the story. So I really thank you for hearing me out.
No, and I appreciate your time, sir. And I mean, it's very interesting. You don't get convicted on hate speech crimes, but the city of Toronto, their bureaucrats and their politicians, they'll convict you. Members of the media party will convict you. That's some justice. And David, I want to just throw to a clip. We ran a piece last week. We found out that the city of Toronto, the Toronto Police Department recently wrapped up a 5-month investigation of the Al-Quds rally. That's the annual hate fest against Israel that takes place every year in June in Toronto. And I had the opportunity to interview this individual. Let's just run a short clip of that and see from in terms of the bailiwick of liberal politicians if this meets the benchmark of hate speech.
What happened to a gay couple in Gaza?
Executed according to Islamic law. Really? Islam doesn't endorse gayism. Islam doesn't endorse homosexuality.
Okay, so would you like to see Sharia law in Canada replace Canadian law?
At some point it will. Because we have families, we are making babies. You're not.
Okay, so there you have it, David. Here's an individual that's saying, once there is a Muslim majority in the West and we're under Sharia law, no offense, but we're going to have to kill the gays because that is considered haram. How does this guy say that and the police investigate? And there was a lot of investigations for other things too. Assembling without a permit, marching on the streets without a permit, and yet nothing to see here, folks, and yet you just go to a little corner in Toronto's gay village and preach the gospel, and it's like they throw the book at you. What kind of a double standard is this, David?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I shouldn't have been arrested. I mean, if in a busy city like Toronto, when someone shares their opinion, I mean, we have all sorts of things every single day, and my opinion that I shared, I basically said, God loves you, there's hope for you, you're welcome, I tolerate you. I mean, that's what got me arrested. But putting that aside, I shouldn't have got arrested there, but, renting a public facility, minding my own business. Some people say, well, don't go to preach in my area. Why don't you have your own church? Why don't you do it in your private space? Well, I did. I rented a facility. We were having our own church services. And now I'm evicted. So what's next? I'm not allowed to have private church services, or I'm going to be arrested. And I think that's the message that they're sending. And that's horrible. That's horrible. In Canada, that's horrible. In anywhere in the world, that's horrible.
Well, it's part of cancel culture, I think, that we're seeing every day. David, you say something that some people perceive as a thought crime, and you are delisted, you are deplatformed, you are censored, you are mocked, you are shunned. And this is just, I think, the latest example. I know you've got a flight to catch, my friend. So one last question, and that is, where do we go from here? What are your, what kind of recourse do you have with the city? Perhaps even a legal challenge. I don't know if you have the money to fund such a challenge, but what is your next step, sir?
Well, a few things. Right now, we're without a permanent facility. We actually had our services for 3 weeks outside in the cold, and this is all before the Christmas season, which is just horrible. And it was an immediate dismissal, no notice for me to actually get a thing. So right now, we're trying to fundraise and get a building. But in regards to this whole situation, I'm trying to secure a lawyer. It's expensive, and I don't have the funds. And I'm trying to. I reached out to a lawyer, and they're reviewing whether they're going to take on the case. But I hope to press charges, and I hope that a legal precedent gets set that they can't do this to anybody, especially my community. I should be tolerated and welcomed within public facilities just like anybody else. And so I am trying to do that, and it's not set in stone yet, but I'm speaking with the lawyer, and I'm trying to secure one, because this whole litigation process is very expensive.
Indeed, and and that's part of the problem too, I think, David, is that even if you are right, the fact is that if you get a lawyer and you have to spend 5, maybe 6 figures to defend yourself, we're into the whole realm of the process of fighting for your right is the penalty, given the financial penalty you're going to be stuck with. So I'll tell you what, my friend, we'll wrap it here. Hopefully we can chat in the new year if there's any more developments to this. And wherever you're flying off to, David, I wish you a Merry Christmas and good luck in getting a building somewhere in Toronto in the weeks ahead so you can preach the gospel that way.
Thank you. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year as well.
Thank you so much. And that was David Lynn of Toronto, who is currently being shut out, as we discussed, of preaching at any city-owned facilities. Well, folks, we here at the Rebel News endeavor to bring you the other side of the story. So why not become a premium content subscriber? Please go to premium.rebelnews.com, sign up, and never miss another Rebel video.